Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show, Science Facts and Fallacies, episode 233. My name is Cameron English, your host as always, joined again, as always, by Dr. Liza Dunn. Liza, what's going on? How are you?
Not much. Been a busy week. It's hard to believe that we're already here.
It's a good thing when the week goes by quickly. I realized that last night. I was hanging out with my son. He's really young. He's just figuring out how to do high fives and fist bumps. He thinks it's the best thing ever. And so when I pull my hand away and he misses, he dies. It's the greatest thing. I am the best comedian in the world as far as my 2-year-old's concerned. And it just, little moments like that remind you about how awesome life can be. So
yeah, it is awesome. And before you know it, they're 15 and playing football.
I don't want to hear it. Don't want to hear it. I want them to stay small for a little bit because it's fun. Okay. Enough of my my whatever it is. What do you do when you're waxing emotional? I don't know. Doesn't matter.
Wax lyrical.
There you go. Enough of my feelings about being a dad. Let's talk about some science. We got 3 stories, as always. So first up, how a quote foreign invasion contributed to Hawaii's devastating wildfires. Next up, while the overall rate of cancer is going down, it's on the rise in young Americans. Why? And finally, sugar is a far more dangerous dangerous enemy. And this is according to a dentist who has some issues with IARC's analysis of aspartame, the artificial sweetener. So that's going to be a cool one. Lots of stuff to get into there. This first story, though, this is by Lucy Auborg, writing for the AFP originally, and then the article showed up on Phys.org a couple of days later. So she starts out, she says, there's this wildfire in Hawaii. It killed more than 100 people, and there's attention going to a surprising culprit. And she says that's invasive grass species that are all over the Hawaiian Islands and in the western U.S. as well. But the reason that these are such great fire starters is that they're drought resistant, which is great in crops, bad in weeds. They're capable of invading really difficult terrain. And as a result of that, they muscle out the native plants, which is the stuff that you want to grow in a place like Hawaii. And this was striking to me, Liza, is that they survive fires much more frequently. I guess they're much more robust as a species than a lot of plants are. So after the fire burns everything, there's some of these critters, or I don't know if you want to call them critters, right? These organisms around, and then they can repopulate, and it's sort of a wash, rinse, repeat kind of a situation. And then the issue of sugarcane plantations. So sugar production in Hawaii was a thing for a long time. And then in the 1990s, it started to wind down with globalization. You have sugar produced elsewhere in the world. So you had these huge plots of land that just went fallow, basically, and no one's maintaining them. So you just have fuel, really, for fires. And this is really the ultimate cause. And there's other variables we'll get into. The article mentions climate change like 77 times. But the key, according to an expert from the University of Hawaii, is a fire ecologist, he says, many parts of Hawaii are trending towards drier conditions, but the fire problem is mostly attributable to the vast extents of non-native grassland left unmanaged by large landowners. So that's where the story starts. I'm sure you have a lot to add, given your background in agriculture. So what did you make of this?
Yeah, I think it is an overlooked part of the problem. So forest fires have always been an issue in places that have dry land and things like that, but they've become more and more frequent. And in fact, in the Western United States alone, there have been multiple forest fires that have gotten much more aggressive in the way they burn, and it is because of a lot of native species have been crowded out by invasive species, invasive grasses and things like that. So, for example, not just to keep it in Hawaii, but in California, there is the giant reed, Arundo donax, which can grow up to 20, I think it's 4 inches a day. So rapidly. And not only does it do that, but it depletes water in water reservoirs and in the Santa Ana River Basin. It can act as like a bridge across streams and things that would be natural breaks for fires. And it acts like incredible kindling in spreading fires. So you've got these invasive grasses that are in Hawaii, like buffalo grass and a variety of other different ones that are actually much sturdier and much they have seed banks that kind of thrive after fires and can get reestablished very quickly and grow before the native plants have a chance to recover. And so you wind up getting spreading of this and increasing invasiveness and crowding out of other plants. And this is the same thing that's happening in the Western United States with things like Rhododendrons There's also Scotch broom. Scotch broom is another big problem with going all the way up into the Sierra Nevada mountain range from the coast all the way up. And it's got a seed bank that can last for 80 years. And it fuels fires quite frequently. And so people think, about, power lines falling with powerful winds and things like that. But the power lines just falling by themselves aren't going to necessarily cause a fire that's not self-contained. You need the kindling, and the kindling is these invasive species of plants. And these invasive species of plants deplete water and water sources, which make it worse because it contributes to the general drying of the area, right? And then they also once again, have very hardy seed banks that can take over plants that can't recover. So the fires actually exacerbate the problem by enhancing their growth because they are able to get established much more quickly. So you are talking about, we used to talk about 500-year floods, and all these floods start coming more and more frequently. Well, these are big, huge fires that burn very hot and spread very rapidly and are hard to contain. So it's a difficult problem. In fact, the campfire that was in 2018 really caused just unprecedented damage. I think it was the worst wildfire in California history. 85 people died. It destroyed 11,000 homes. It actually destroyed over 18,000 structures and cost over $16.5 billion. And if you think about it, if you manage this, a very easy way of preventing this, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, is to really try to have aggressive management of invasive species of grass and different plants that are contributing to this problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's so many variables here, and it's a little more counterintuitive than I thought as I started looking into it, and probably a lot of people are in the same position. So what's the solution? My first thought was this sort of illustrates why herbicides are really, really important and why land management is really important, but I don't know if that's true or not. So maybe you could speak to that. I mean, how essential is it that you get in there and you have people really taking care of this before the fire starts, obviously?
That's exactly right. I think I think that people have a romantic notion of, going back to nature, and they want to, they perceive that if you don't, do land management, if you let things go back to their natural form, that they are doing better for the earth. And it's because when you do manage these things, it does involve the use of chemicals. It involves the use of, logging and a whole variety of different ways that the Bureau of Land Management can try to mitigate a fire risk. And there's so much kind of mythology around, logging and the logging industry, and so much mythology around herbicides being, terrible for the environment and different species, that there's a real reluctance to use them in managing these things. And that's a problem because you're never going to be able to get on top of these things, these invasive species, with manual labor. I mean, we don't even have enough labor for agriculture, right? And so getting on it with manual labor is pretty difficult. So, for example, the town of Windsor in California tried to ban glyphosate, and because they were concerned about the IARC report. We'll come back to IARC again, but the IARC claimed that it was a probable carcinogen. And when they looked at what it would take to actually manage weeds, to convert all bedding areas to hand weeding with no chemical use, would increase the current annual cost from $33,000 to approximately $280,000 for weed control. Hand pulling weeds will require an increase in contract labor, which is a current staffing challenge. This has been known to increase workers' compensation rates because of constant bending, twisting, and stooping to remove the weeds. Now, so because of the claim, the allegation that glyphosate causes cancer, people have decided to put it aside, but they can't keep up with the weeds, and this is in just a regular, weed control setting in parks and places that you have recreation and things like that. Now, when you've got out of control invasive species that crowd out native plants and things like that, you have to have some way of mitigating that. Otherwise, you're not only damaging crops, you're damaging the wildlife, you're damaging habitat for endangered species and things like that. So we've got to figure out, and it doesn't have to be glyphosate. This is just, herbicides are one of the cornerstones for managing these things. And I'm not going to comment in depth on logging and forestry because I'm not an expert in those areas. But I know that the forestry industry has been met with the same kind of resistance to chopping undergrowth down and things like that that actually contribute to the kindling load in wildfire. And the problem is that you're talking about real human lives here. This theoretical concern, it has led to the abandonment of scientific management of these things, and that's cost lives. It costs lives, and it's tragic.
Yeah, I made a joke about climate change earlier, not because I don't think it's real or it's not serious, but I think one of the problems we have is that instead of dealing with difficult issues like that, like getting a county government or a state government or whatever to look at the evidence and go, oh, we need to come up with a practical land management plan and possibly spend more money and figure out a solution, right? Instead of doing that, we just kind of like, well, it's this climate change thing. So, everyone needs to cut their emissions and then the problem will resolve itself. And I think even if that's true, and again, that's a topic for another day, the problem is that's not a solution, right? These people in Hawaii who, and I'm not downplaying what they experienced at all. I saw mothers with infants jumping into the water, because that's unbearable. I can't imagine the fear of that, and then losing your loved ones. But all that to say, you're not really solving the problem with the discussion like that. So yeah, let's say yes, climate change is real. The Earth is getting warmer. Okay, now what? Let's adapt to the situation. And we've been really good at that overall, right? We mentioned this either last week or a couple weeks ago. But as the world has warmed, we've looked around and gone, well, we've got a little extra money. Let's buy some air conditioning and let's improve our infrastructure and let's set up cooling centers, right? So as a result of that, fewer people are dying, and we're as a species, we're becoming more robust to the effects of inclement weather. So we have the precedent, if you will. We know how to do this on a broader scale. So on this one issue of land management, let's do that, and if that means clearing underbrush so there's less fuel for fires, if that means using an herbicide that's perfectly safe when it's used according to its label.
That's not a carcinogen.
Yes. Right. That, I'm just saying that it's been, whether it's glyphosate or another one, if it's been registered by the EPA or another regulatory body around the world, there's safe ways to use it. And they give you detailed instructions. And they say, if you don't follow these, you're in trouble, right? Every farmer, every pesticide applicator knows this. So let's use the tools that we have. And again, I'm not saying that climate change is a myth or whatever, but let's not point to this thing it's just inevitable. Like, it's here and we need to deal with it, but let's stop saying, well, there's this grand thing and we all need to come together and do this really grand plan. Otherwise, we're going to keep burning up our natural resources and innocent people are going to die. It's like, no, let's fix that.
And we have the technology to be able to do this and do it in a safe, environmentally friendly, and with human safety taken into account. And if you think about it, on the flip side, if you're talking about hiring enough people to hand weed this stuff, right, which is once again spreading everywhere, what was Cesar Chavez's human rights campaign about? It was about weeding, and it was about the really terrible circumstances that migrant workers found themselves in when they were weeding in California. And so, he got rid of the short-handled hoe for agriculture, because of the devastating back injuries this caused in people. So this really is a human rights issue in terms of people have the right to know that their property is going to be protected. They have the right to, have good land management practices around them, and that you shouldn't be having to depend on back-breaking labor to achieve those things, because you don't have the resources to manage that labor.
Yeah, it's very important. And I just to add to what you said, I think it's important that we put the focus there, because overall there's less area being burned today. And that's one of the things I was surprised. I see that on Twitter. I'm like, no, that can't be true, right? So I went and looked it up, and I'm looking at a study. This is from the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society. So they're based in the UK. But this team of authors, they looked at all the data and they said, direct quote, global area burned appears to have overall declined over past decades, and there is increasing evidence that there is less fire in the global landscape today than centuries ago. And one of the reasons for that, they put it down to, is that there's less open fire around, which kind of makes sense, right? You don't ignite something when you drive your car, right? You have a combustible engine. So you're not exposed to open fire. Same thing with cooking it at home or any kind of transportation, heating your house, right? A lot of these things are electric, or they're safe gas systems and so forth. So as a result of this, there's actually less stuff being burned. So again, just to put this back where the focus needs to be, is helping people manage this, and I'm sure this is really more complex than I'm letting on right now. In that you have to come up with specific plans, and you need the labor, but you also need the expertise, right? You need ecologists, you need people who will help you solve the problem without trying to, raise money with press releases like a lot of these environmental groups do.
And part of that also is, this turns into this never-ending thing of lawsuits, right? So if you don't have the kindling, the electricity is not going to wind up. The downed lines, because of the hurricane, are not going to be able to cause as damaging of a fire. But they're suing the electric companies, just like they sued the electric companies in California. But so you can mitigate this problem to control things better than you can with high winds and all of that stuff. And so lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit is not the solution to the problem. The solution to the problem is to prevent it. And there are ways of preventing it. And I hope that people will start considering that a little bit more.
Yes. It's a great example of, having to think carefully through an issue. I'm going to link to these resources that I'm pulling from, just so people can see where it's coming from. That's another fascinating thing that we can talk about some other time, is how the literature on a given topic is pretty clear, but it's not what you read in the headlines. And that
exactly
drives me absolutely bananas. But we'll leave that for another day. And let's talk about why younger people are getting cancer more frequently, apparently. So this is by a journalist named Lindsay Beaver, writing for the Washington Post. She's talking about a study that was published on the JAMA Open Network. So you can read the study for free if you want to go check it out. But she begins and she says, most cancers in the US typically occur in people who are 65 and older. It's just one of those, I think it's like a disease of civilization. That's the lingo for it. Heart disease, cancer, diabetes, this kind of stuff. It afflicts you usually later in life. So the younger you are, the better off in terms of this immediate health question. But according to this study, cancers in this group, where most of them are, they're declining in this group, but they're slightly increasing in people who are under 50 years old. And I think the biggest increase was in the 30s. So 30 to 39 years old, this is the biggest increase. They don't know what's causing this, but they point to a handful of things. They say maybe it's smoking in younger people, maybe it's obesity, maybe it's a sedentary lifestyle, maybe it's pollution, maybe it's, they don't know, right? They're just kind of throwing out these hypotheses for possible explanations. So I don't know what to make of this. It's sort of, we'll get more into this as we talk about the article and the study itself, but it seems to me that this is a relatively small increase. It needs to be researched and we need to take it seriously. But not to assault the reporter here, because I think she did a reasonable job of reporting all the details. But it seems to me that this is a little bit of a study and a story that was kind of meant to, like, look at the headline, and then when you read the article, you go, oh, well, I'm not going to contract cancer next week, right?
That's exactly right.
So maybe you can explain, because there are a lot of statistics and a lot of tables and stuff in here. So maybe you can drill down on some of that for folks.
Yeah, so they looked at early onset cancer, which is cancer between under the age of 50, and it's between 2010 and 2019. And they noticed that there was a little bit of an uptick, really in females more than males, in the incidence of cancers and certain kinds of cancers. And it was a small uptick. So they found that breast cancer was increasing in incidence, but colorectal cancer, so there were more cases of breast cancer, but colorectal cancer was the fastest growing, and GI cancers were the fastest growing over that same time period. And so in 2010, there were 56,051 people diagnosed with cancers. And in 2019, there were 56,468. So it's less than 1% increase overall. So I don't think that we need to have this a panic, but it's kind of interesting to see that it's in females, and it's actually in Alaskan, Asia Pacific, and Hispanics, where the incidence was increasing. It remained stable for Caucasians and actually decreased in African Americans. Now, I don't know if that's because of lack of increased screening or lack of screening, or we don't know why these numbers are. They may just be a statistical fluke too. Right. Men had a decrease of close to 5% decrease in cancers, and women had an increase of about 4.3% in this age group. So it's an interesting study. I do think that there is a potential for obesity and a sedentary lifestyle to be contributing to this, because obesity makes you we're kind of growing in size. One of the reasons why we want to maybe consider having diet sodas and things like that. But we've been growing in size, and especially over the past 3 years with COVID, people have been very sedentary in their lives, in their houses. There's been a big uptick in alcohol consumption. And so I think that these things, it'll be interesting to see what kind of comes over the next several years, right? But the GI cancers tended to be on an increase, and they were kind of funny GI cancers. They're cancers of the appendix and cancers of the bile duct and the pancreas and things like that. Now, some of my very best friends are top tier cancer researchers at Washington University. And anecdotally, they've sort of talked about the uptick of colorectal cancer in young women. That seems that they don't know why. But there's also a very significant number of these young women are cured with therapy. So 5 years out, it does. They even though the diagnosis is terrible, they wind up having cures. So it's got a better prognosis than a lot of these other cancers do. But once again, they've noticed an uptick of that kind of cancer. They've also mentioned that there are sort of two little times in life, besides the old people, right? 2 times in life where you see upticks. And one is in kids, where you see acute lymphocytic leukemias and things like, and brain tumors and things like that. You get a little uptick there. And then later on in your late 30s, early 40s, there's another uptick. That's subtle because it's usually, overshadowed by the burden of cancers in the 60s and 70s. It's thought to, probably be due to some underlying, not necessarily inherited, but genetic instability that, that's unfortunate for people. So they've mentioned that seeing that and as a pattern in cancer development. Remember, cancer is a disease of DNA. So if you damage your DNA in some capacity, and you can cause, increased cell turnover, and then you make more room for mutations, and those mutations can then take on a malignant character. So back to obesity, how does obesity contribute to it? Well, obesity contributes to about 13 different cancers, these included that are mentioned here. So of the breast, of the esophagus, of the stomach, of the colon, pancreas, all of those. But obesity, when you've got that many fat cells, especially around your midriff, with visceral obesity, you wind up having something called insulin resistance. And so you need to produce more insulin to be able to get sugar into your cells. If you have lots of sugar floating around, you get into your pre-diabetic and diabetic states, and then you wind up having more of an inflammatory state. So obesity contributes to sort of overall inflammatory change in the body, and inflammation can cause chronic stress on the cells and cause DNA damage, right? It can cause oxidative injury, all that kind of stuff. So this kind of underlying brewing inflammatory state with visceral obesity. Then you add on the insulin, excess insulin, because you need to make more insulin to get glucose in the cells. Insulin has a growth-like factor. It's an anabolic. And you know this because when type 1 diabetics take insulin, one of the things that can happen is they can develop heaviness. They can get heavy. And so often teenage patients who are worried about being heavy will actually not take their insulin and get into ketosis as a weight loss mechanism, but then they have terrible complications from that. But insulin promotes it's anabolic, and it promotes cell growth. Also, when you've got obesity, you've got a lot more sort of estrogenic compounds floating around, and estrogenic compounds are associated with the development of things like breast cancer and endometrial cancer and things like that. So I suspect that with the increasing obesity, that's why we're seeing more of this in these age groups. With a sedentary lifestyle, if you can really actually mitigate that risk a lot by even just walking every day for half an hour to an hour, and as opposed to intensive exercise, you can do some pretty good things that help change that risk profile. That said, there's some very young, healthy. I know young, healthy people who've gotten cancer, and some of these cancers, and that's probably something underlying that's genetic that led to that for them, and it's really it's really tough for them. It's a tough diagnosis, and it's a bad thing to have. So it's worth exploring, I think, but it's not worth sort of developing conspiracy theories about different things causing it. I think we need to have some good ideas about what could be causing it.
Yeah, I imagine it's terrifying. Last year, I had a mole on my shoulder or something that my wife spotted. And like just that moment, I was like, oh, crap, right? Yeah. Just for a second, that tinge of utter terror. And then I went to the doctor. She's like, yeah, it's nothing. So
But that's it's very scary. I've had a young relative that had early onset colorectal cancer. She's fine.
Yeah.
And then I saw several of those in the emergency department too. And so there is a cohort of younger people that are a little bit more susceptible.
Yes. Yeah. Your comments about obesity are very, very instructive, I think. And I can't help but think about this whole body positivity movement, this fat acceptance movement, because that, interestingly, is geared towards young women, right? That whole movement is really driven by young women. No disrespect to anybody in particular, but this is really what's driving it, right? Is like, I'm beautiful at any size. You need to love me for who I am, et cetera, et cetera. And right, the biggest uptick was in young women in this study, right? So I think that's an interesting connection. Let me point to an article by my colleague, Dr. Chuck Dinnerstein with ACSH, retired vascular surgeon, really smart guy. I always go to him with medical questions if I don't ask you. He wrote an article last year. It's called Explaining Fat, and it's based on a review article in the journal Cell. And they just talk about how your adipose tissue grows, how it contracts, and how it affects the rest of your organs, and how it affects your overall health. And one of the things he points out is that when you gain excessive body fat, it's called the extracellular matrix that surrounds your fat cells. This gets damaged as you gain weight. And instead of this loose, healthy mesh that keeps your cells where they're supposed to be, it becomes this tight, constricted, sort of almost like a wall, I want to say. And then that releases inflammatory signals all throughout your body. And cancer can be one of the things this contributes to, but all sorts of health problems. So I point to this, and I encourage everybody to read this article. It's very helpful. But in other words, you have a mechanism that seems to explain what's happening. It's in the right cohort, young women and young men. And you seem to have like the cultural environment that would encourage this. So, with these sorts of pieces of information as background, it seems like we could address this as time goes on and as we do more homework. So I think that's important to stress.
And the other important thing to stress is that there are incredible advancements in cancer therapies that have just really, really amazing advances that have been invented over the past couple of years. So cancer is not necessarily a deathly diagnosis. It's very scary for people. But it's quite often very, very treatable. And like I said, one of my very, very best friends specializes in that extracellular matrix, and as a cancer researcher at Washington, I concur with that comment of Dr. Dinnerstein's.
Yeah, it's really important. By the way, eating celery or turmeric is not the cure.
And neither are coffee enemas or like that. No, that's not going to.
I'm reminded of an old episode of the show Scrubs. It's still my favorite. It's one of my favorites. You probably don't want to watch medical dramas, and I can't blame you. But there's one episode where this guy comes in for treatment for cancer, and he's eating a red bell pepper, and he's like on his computer, and he tells the doctor, he's like, "Oh, according to this article I'm reading, red bell pepper is gonna help." And the doctor goes, "Yeah, no, I mean, I went to medical school and I've been a physician for 30 years, but what do I know? The guy on Wikipedia is telling you to eat a red bell pepper, right?" It's like,
that's the same thing with vitamin C. People are selling. I know cancer patients who were spending $2,000-$3,000 a month to get intravenous vitamin C. And no, the pharmaceutical industry has not hidden this magic cure with vitamin C from you. Know that if it were that easy, it'd be curable. We'd notice that, right?
Yeah.
What you're doing is you're making somebody's urine very, very expensive, and you're banking, right? So I think that it's tragic, the charlatans that take advantage of people's real desperation when they get diagnoses. And some of the things that people do, like Steve Jobs had a perfectly treatable
fruitarian diet, right? You just ate
fruit. And then and he was brilliant guy. Right. I mean, look at what he created, but he could have survived that with by using mainstream medicine.
Yeah.
And the tragedy is that it's funny. It's like scientists and brilliant people get themselves tripped up when they, and he could have survived. And who knows what else the world would have gotten if he was, still alive.
That's a really good point. And I believe he died of pancreatic cancer,
Yeah.
which is I highly doubt is a coincidence, because that's what produces insulin. Right. So
the pancreas produces insulin. There are different kinds of pancreatic cancer. Most pancreatic cancers are really hard to manage. It's got very, very poor prognosis. Mm-hmm. They're isolated. They get a lot of scar tissue around them. They're very hard to get therapeutics too. So that's a hard cancer to treat. Mm-hmm. His particular version, though, was very amenable to treating, and mm-hmm. he decided to go the alternative medicine route because alternative medicine practitioners are very persuasive. And so somehow we in the medical field need to figure out how to relate
right.
in a way that these quack doctors don't.
It's tough, because folks like you spend your lives becoming experts and learning how to treat sick people, and then these idiots online get really good at cold calling effectively.
Yeah.
Right? So they get good at shilling bullshit. That's the problem. Incidentally, I don't know if Steve Jobs got sick because of his diet or if he went on that diet after he got sick. I could have mixed those up. So don't take.
I think he went on that diet after he got sick.
Okay. Yeah. And it was funny. I remember Ashton Kutcher played him in a movie, and he said he got sick eating that diet. Which I think.
Yeah. Probably got malnourished.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Anyways, let's move on. We've belabored this enough, but interesting stuff. Read the study. It's at least the discussion section, not too technical in spots. Let's move on to this last article though, and then we'll wrap it up for the weekend. So this is called "Sugar is a Far More Dangerous Enemy. Dentist explains why banning aspartame in foods and drinks is a reckless idea." This is really interesting. This is an article from Stat News originally, and this is by Melissa Weintraub. And she makes some points that will be very familiar to listeners and viewers of the show. She says there's a lot of skepticism and doubt around IARC's determination that aspartame is possibly carcinogenic, which we'll revisit in a second. She says the FDA has no concerns, that there's multiple studies, really high quality studies, really good reviews that have been done all over the world that cannot find evidence of this association. And she also says you can just look at the statistics. You can look at how much of this stuff has been consumed over the years. You can look at rates of whatever cancer this is supposed to cause. And you can say, well, that's weird. There's no association here at all, right? And as we've talked about this a lot with IARC, is that they don't look at the overall body of evidence. They find particular pieces, and then based on that, they say, well, I mean, it could hypothetically cause cancer, and there's our press release, and then the lawyers go to work. So that's the real problem. I don't want to spend too much time recounting this. I'll let you jump in here, but go ahead.
Yeah. So first of all, I want to just point out that I actually don't think sugar in and of itself is an enemy. I think that sugar in moderation is fine, but there are people who need to reduce their sugar intake, and there are people and there are reasons why not to have a whole lot of sugar or have a sugar substitute. So one, this is wonderful for aspartame is great for kids who've got diabetes, because then they don't have to. They can enjoy some of the same things that other children do. So that's one. Mm-hmm. Two, gum chewing actually with non-sugar gum, so aspartame containing gum, actually promotes tooth health. It increases the amount of saliva that you've got, and mm-hmm. that actually winds up having a bactericidal effect on the microorganisms that cause tooth decay. So it actually is better for your teeth to chew sugary gum. So, I don't know what particular brand to call out, or if we should call out brands, but But
are you on Big Gum's payroll? Is that what you're trying to do?
Right. Exactly. But sugar-free gum actually, it does benefit tooth health. the second thing, the other thing is that, with lots of sugar floating around in your mouth, right, you get tooth decay. And tooth decay is not only a problem in terms of, just discomfort and things like that. Tooth decay can also lead to other health problems. And there are some people who believe that there's actually a fair amount of data out there that suggests that bad teeth are linked to heart disease because of chronic inflammation. And then strep viridans, which is one of the bugs that you have in your mouth normally, can also do things like cause infective endocarditis if you have, valves and things like that. So tooth decay is something that it's not just a discomfort thing. You really actually want to manage it because you want to prevent the side effects of once again, a lot of inflammation in the mouth, and other inflammatory changes that can lead to problems that are distal that are not necessarily related to the mouth itself. So heart disease, coronary artery disease, valvular disease, and things like that. And I don't know if you've ever seen how terrible tooth decay can be. I mean, if you think about like methamphetamine users and stuff like that, you see meth mouth, yes, unbelievable tooth decay. And the other thing is that it's an inexpensive way of preventing tooth decay, as opposed to if you think about a lot of people don't have access to dentists. Dental insurance is separate from medical insurance, and it's very hard to often these things are very expensive, right? To go to the dentist and find out that you have a whole bunch of cavities and things like that. So I think that, regular brushing and flossing, once again, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Flossing and brushing is good. And then, if you don't have constant sugar in your mouth by chewing sugary gums, you're reducing the chance of getting tooth decay. So I think she's absolutely right. I think that, once again, aspartame is really important for preventing or helping with the decreasing obesity if you like sweet things. And, once again, walking around the clock is probably productive as well. Everything in moderation, but there's no reason to think that this is going to cause cancer.
Yeah, and let me remind folks, we went over this last time we talked about this when we had our episode and we just went into IARC's finding. But when they label something possibly carcinogenic, I think in a lot of people's minds that means it's likely that it causes cancer. Now, this is IARC's definition. They say something that's possibly carcinogenic is a finding based on limited or no evidence in humans, limited to insufficient evidence in animals. So in other words, to be possibly carcinogenic, they don't even actually have to show that it causes cancer in humans, let alone in rodents. You know what I mean? So this is really, really inferior evidence, which is why the FDA came out and said, you forgot to carry one somewhere. Like, I don't know what you're doing over there in France, but this is all wrong, right? And they never do that. They never comment on IARC's findings like that. So I think that's really important to stress. The other thing is, this story is a great example, and you were alluding to this with obesity and oral health, is the importance of risk assessment, right? So if you get all freaked out about aspartame and then lawsuits or regulations get it pulled off the shelves, these are some of the clear downsides, right? And I mean, obesity is a real problem, as we were talking about, but oral health itself, not just because it's associated with other stuff. And I've seen that, people with drug abuse, how it affects their health. Years ago, I almost was on borderline gum disease because you were saying dental insurance is expensive. And for 10 years, I was, in my 20s and I'm poor. I'm like, I'm not going to dentist. That's nonsense. Right. And then I finally went back and they're like, look, dude, we gotta get in there. Right. So they actually had to flip my gums down and effectively power wash right at the base of my teeth, and I'm glad they did that. Yeah. It's crazy. And I mean, your face is numbed up. You can't feel any of it, but they're like, yeah, your gums are flipped down right now. That's how serious this is, So now I floss my teeth 18 times a day. It's a very important point, it's a very important aspect of health is all I'm getting at. And this seems to be overlooked, right? Even when you read news stories about this, they almost never bring this up. Like the obesity thing, they just sort of yeah, people eat this stuff. It's really popular. They never get to why. And that is That's really important to remember.
That's exactly right. And then last but not least, IARC has everything, according to IARC, is a possible, probable, or definite carcinogen. So they've looked at over 1,000 chemicals, and only one has been named as not a carcinogen, and that's caprolactam, the stretchy stuff in yoga pants. Yeah. So I think that them labeling that as a possible carcinogen is just not aligned with reality.
Yeah. So what I should do is make everything out of yoga pants.
That's right.
Yeah. So when I spray glyphosate on the weeds in my driveway, I just put on yoga pants everywhere.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Folks may not know this, but hot dogs are possible carcinogens. So is working the night shift. So is hairdressing. I want to say pickled vegetables are probable carcinogens. You know, I mean, the list goes on and on. Oh, at one point they said coffee was a possible carcinogen, but then one of the antioxidants in coffee reduced your risk of cancer. So try to figure that one out.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Okay. Well, there's a little bit of good news for you as you go into the weekend, as you can enjoy aspartame. It might have some slight medical benefit, and it's not going to kill you. So there you go.
There you go.
Happy weekend. All right. Okay. We'll be back next time for 234. We're clipping along here. Very excited about that. In the meantime, follow us on social media at Dr. Liza MD on Twitter, at CamJ English. Thank you as always for the comments and the feedback on the show. Really appreciate that. Feel free to ask questions and we'll talk about it right here on our wonderful little studio set in my office. Thank you so much. We'll see you guys next time.